Welcome to another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Dr. Dave Peltz, and joining us, as always, because we're a pair come together, Dr. Joe Hamlett. How are you doing today, Dr. Joe Hamlett?
I'm doing good, Dr. Dave Peltz.
The
How are you
energy
doing?
level is just too high in here. I know I need to
I,
knock
I
it down
know
about
it,
five
man. We've got to
notches.
turn it down.
The power of coffee. And speaking of the power of coffee, today's topic is the power of choice.
Okay.
Akin, caffeine, choice. I guess the two could be related, but again, today's topic is the power of choice. So, in our usual customary manner, one of us introduces and then quickly transfers the topic to the other person. So, Joe, what are your thoughts on the power of choice?
That is a very powerful statement, power of choice. I'm often reminded when I think of power of choice. And so this really came to light for me about 18 months ago when I was on or asked to be on a podcast from a fellow colleague or doctor. And, she asked me some questions. And one of the things, and I don't remember how she phrased the question, but it came down to what was the thing that you were most challenging or that concerned you the most or something like that. And I don't know, again, I don't remember the direct question, but it came down to my explanation or answer was the fact that, over the years I've earned this doctorate. And when I would introduce myself, I would introduce myself as Joe. And, so continue that answer or response to her question. I mentioned that it felt like I gave my power away
Mm,
when I called myself Joe rather than Dr. Hamlet. And she thought that was pretty um, insightful, and she kind of we explored that a little bit more. But to me, that's what I think about when I think of the power of choice, because I chose, and again in my own terms, to give my power away by
mm,
referring to myself as Joe. Not that I want to come off as I only want to be known as Dr. Hamlet or that respect me for that. No, it was more that I really felt uh, a loss for myself when I did
mm,
that, because I really did feel like I gave my power away. Because, my mind, I thought if I introduce myself as Dr. Hamlet, I'm immediately going to get some type of response. And in most cases, up to that point, it had not been received favorable. People immediately look at you differently or respond to you differently rather than if I just say Joe, then I'm again just the average Joe, just like them. And
mm,
so that took me a little bit, uh, it took me a while to really understand that dynamic. But now in professional settings, I keep my power. So
mm,
I refer to myself as Dr. Hamlet, right? And in a lot of times when I just meet people individually, I do I do refer to myself as Joe. Like I said, I'm not trying to come in and kick in a door, which I said many occasions or many times. That's not who I want to be presented as, just Dr. Hamlet. But in certain settings, it is applicable, and I should do that. So that's when I think of power of choice, that was one example of where I felt like I gave my power away.
mm,
But in the larger terms, when I think of power of choice, I think of the power of choice has a lot to do with situations that you're in. For instance, you're up for a promotion, or you think you're up for a promotion, or you apply for a position and you don't get it, right? So you have two choices.
mm,
You have the choice to become a victim, where you say, oh, woe is me, or you also have the power of choice to say that I'm still going to be a victor. I'm going to take this, whatever that situation was, and turn it favorable. I'm
mm,
going to look at it as a learning experience, an opportunity to maybe learn more skills. Maybe I realized that I wasn't selected because I lacked something. But I'm not going to sit down and waller and say, oh, I never get anything. I'm always being, discounted. I'm not this, I'm not that. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take it as my power of choice to become a victor and not the victim. So that's what I think of in terms of the power of choice. It's my choice whether I stay with an organization, whether I move on, whether I stay in a bad situation. It's still my choice. I
Mm,
know it's not as black and white in a lot of cases as I just made it seem, but for the most part, we do have the power to choose which scenario that we apply to or subscribe to. So I think the power of choice could be relevant to the situation you're in. Like I say, not all situations are black and white where you can just say, I'm going to choose to do this or choose to do that. In some cases, there may be some restraints where you can't do that. And so it may be still a choice that you can choose to be positive about it, but it may take a little more effort and energy to
right.
remain positive or to make that approach work. So
Yeah.
that's what I think
Joe,
of in terms of power of
you have
choice.
mentioned a lot of, or several very important pieces, and I'm not going to go down the list and list them all. The one that stands out is probably your first one, the decision or the choice to give up something of yourself, and not from a facet of pretentiousness, but almost to kind of normalize a situation or be accepted. And I can relate to that because, and I've actually experimented with this in my air quotes free time or spare time, if there is a such thing when you're working, because if you have spare time at work, then you're not working, right? So in my spare time at work, I've experimented with introducing myself as Dr. Peltz, Dr. Dave Peltz, or just Dave, or Dave Peltz, the doctor
Right.
versus the non-doctor. And it is interesting to see and observe how people perceive you and how that perception changes and how the behaviors tend to change with those perceptions. And for those of you who, if this is your first time or the first couple of times you're tuning into Joe and I, to give you a little background, Joe and I both of us came from very humble beginnings. We did not grow up in prominent middle class neighborhoods. Actually, from the complete opposite, and not going upwards, going downwards. We grew up. We were non-affluent. Let's put it that way. We grew up poor. So when we talk about using our title, it is not from a position of pretentiousness or power. It is from a position of reminding ourselves of the journeys that reminding us of our journey and what it took for us to go from our humble beginnings to where we are now. And the part that a lot of folks miss is the journey piece, and they only focus on where we are right now. So when we talk about the
Right.
power of choice, it becomes a position, it becomes from a position of, from our previous episodes, of self-awareness. We're aware of who we are, where we started, where we are now, and we're aware of our journey that got us to this point. And so the power of choice really does reside not with others, but with ourselves. Now, others can choose to perceive us a certain way based upon how little or how much they know about us, but that perception does not necessarily dictate our own choices, our own power choice, whether we give up that choice to make certain decisions or whether we retain that power to make certain decisions and choices. So when we talk about the power of choice, this isn't so much about the power piece or the choice piece, it's the combination, the amalgam of the power of choice itself. Are we going to retain the power within ourselves to make choices, some of them easy, some of them difficult or challenging, to go to the next level or the next place, whatever that place or level or position is? Are we retaining that, or are we giving that up? And to Joe's point, victim or victor? Are we
Yeah.
giving are we giving that power away, thereby diminishing our own value within ourselves, knowing that we're diminishing it, versus saying, I have the capacity to do certain things, and this is the decision I've made, and I'm owning that decision. good, bad, or indifferent, this is my choice and I'm going to own it. So when we talk about the power choice, that's really the angle and perspective that we're coming from. It's not about positional power or title. It's about the decision-making process and whether we've given the quote unquote power to make that decision to someone else or whether we've retained it. And when we start thinking about that perspective, it it makes this topic run very narrow and very deep in many cases. So, Joe, I'm going to pause for a moment.
Yeah, so I think, and I think when I had this conversation, when I was on the podcast 18 months or so ago, that was, I think, where we left it with the diminishing of who you are or your abilities. I think that was the most important piece of that, is the fact that when you give up your power, you take away from who you are. You don't allow yourself to shine, or to be who you're supposed to be or want to be, because you've relinquished that power to someone else, and you've allowed them to define what that means for you, whether you're capable or not. You've allowed them now to make that decision. And it could be something as simple as, in a meeting, and someone says, "Hey, do you have a comment, or do you have any other information you'd like to provide?" And you choose, knowing that you know more information or could, be beneficial, but you choose not to offer that. And so you've allowed them to, take away your power to maybe provide input, or to, give more information that could be helpful, but
Yeah.
you've made that choice to not do that. And so
Yeah.
that's what I think about, when we think about that diminishing your abilities or who you are when you choose, like that, like I said in that, you know scenario about the meeting. You may have pertinent information, but now people may view it as, well, they're not contributing, where in fact you probably do have a lot of information or a lot of things you can contribute, but you chose not to provide it.
Yeah,
So
and I just want to throw this out there again for the viewers and listeners who are just joining us. This is not about, power choice is not about a position of power or arrogance or um, authority. It's about the internal awareness of that power and whether you're giving up on that part of yourself or giving away a part of yourself that
right,
you've worked so hard to achieve without flaunting or throwing that power of awareness into someone else's space to diminish them. So
right,
this power of choice is not again to diminish someone or diminish ourselves, and that is where some of the misconception can reside. Again, so when we talk about the power of choice, do I want to get up and go to work today or not? You have that is your decision.
right. Yeah,
You also have the power within that choice to understand that there are certain consequences that come with that decision, positive,
yeah,
negative, or indifferent, and you're owning them. So it's power of choice is about the ownership and acknowledgement of self-awareness within yourself on what you've accomplished and what you're doing with that power. And some people use the power of choice and wield it in a very negative way, and other
right,
people use it to do nothing but to share the the positiveness to help other people and the willingness to give to help others just for the sake of helping them, because many self-aware people that have come from humble beginnings do just that. They give to other people because they know what it's like. They know how challenging that journey can be because they've had to earn their way. They've had to work their way to get there. And it becomes more um, a choice of sharing versus diminishing. And so when I think of power of choice, I think of, when I was in high school, and my grades were not good. So I had to make a decision. What am I going to do with that? My decision was, well, I'm not smart enough to go to college, so I'm going to go in the military. Later on in my career, I made the decision, hey, I need to do something about my situation to change my situation because I was not happy with it. So I started going to school. And as big proponents as Joe and I are of higher education, we also know that college isn't for everyone. So
right.
if you want to pursue um, a technical track or an academic track or whatever, that is your choice. But that choice is yours. You own that choice. You have the power to make the decision to go left, right, straight, up, down, around, through, whatever. But you have to be aware of that decision that you're making, that aware of that power that you have within yourself to make those decisions and own those outcomes. And if you mess up, I'm throwing my hands up in the air for our listeners. If you mess up, own it, correct your mistakes, and
Right.
press forward. Don't wallow in self pity and say, oh, woe is me. Own it. We're all going
Right.
to make mistakes. None of us are absolutely perfect. Even the most successful people, athletes, entertainers, politicians, salespeople, teachers, educators, everyone has made mistakes to get to where they are. Because if you've not made mistakes, then you've learned nothing, in my opinion.
That's absolutely part of the success cycle.
Yes.
That you have to fail to get to that success, and in some cases you fail over and over again, but you're learning at the same time. And going back to what you just said, the owning piece. So if you fail, you try it again. You try something different. You change it up, but you won't get there unless you continue to figure out what doesn't work until you finally get to the point where it does work. But I
Mm-hmm.
think you said something very important, which ties into like most of our episodes, to previous episodes where you talked about the self awareness piece, and that will allow you to own what your whatever choice you make. So, like you said, you went back, you chose the decision to go to school or and join the military. That was your first comment,
Mm-hmm.
and that was very similar to me. Made the choice to join the military, but partway through the military, I learned I needed to go to school, and so I made that choice to take, make that decision to choose to go down that path. It was my choice for my own reasons, and then it just continued to blossom into more and more things. But I think that's very powerful. The fact that you become aware, and that helps you again own those decisions you make, but it also helps you to open your mind to the possibilities. I know we've said that on many of our episodes, but the power to choose gives you the power to, like we said, become a victim or victor, or to own things and to
Mm-hmm.
move on from it. But that also again opens the possibilities of things that you're not aware of right now. That again, as you try down a path, and if you define what success means to you, you start down that path and you start uncovering and discovering other things in your path to success. You fail in one way but succeed in another way. So I think that's owning that, you being the director of your script, your own movie, allows you to do that by making your own choices based on, again, your definition of success, your own self-awareness, your critical self-reflection, all those things that have defined your path to this point. They will continue to define your path as you continue to choose what steps you take, which directions you go. That's still all in your corner. Again, whether you fail at whatever you're attempting, it's not a failure unless you don't try. So the more you fail, the more you fail forward, because you're going to learn what works, what doesn't work. You're going to continue to grow and develop. So I think that's very important, that self-awareness piece, and understanding that you are going to fail multiple times in most cases, but that's going to allow you to reach that end state, or an undefined end state right now. Like I say, you may be headed down a path that you thought you were trying to get to or achieve, and you realize, you know what, if I just alter this a little bit, I'm going to achieve this goal, which I hadn't even thought of. And I think you said that earlier on in the episode, that you start to learn about things that weren't apparent to you or obvious at the very beginning, but now they become clearer because you chose. And again, what we've always said, we may have a destination in sight, You may not get there directly, just straight point A to B. You may have to go A, B, B, C, C, or go all the way to Z and turn around and come back to A. But the idea is that you're learning, you're failing, you're improving, you're getting better, and it's again based on your own decisions and the power of choice, not that someone else defined those things for you. So I think
Yeah,
it's
Joe, you're saying you've said so many things there, just so much stuff in such a short period of time, which is awesome. I mean, talk about nuggets. It's like I'm mining over here. I'm just like I can't keep up with it. So, uh, some of the things that you mentioned made me think of like the personal versus professional side of things on the power of choice. So when you think
right,
about personally, we can choose, we have the power to choose to stay in a relationship, positive,
right,
negative, or indifferent. We have the choice from a personal perspective, the power of choice to raise our kids a certain way or
right,
not a certain way. The same goes with the professional environment. We can choose to stay in a positive work environment, or we can choose to stay in a toxic work environment. It just depends on our own situation, but we do have the power to change those situations. We're
right,
not saying that it's going to be painless. Some of those changes can be extremely painful, but there's also some very deep lessons that can be learned with those challenging situations. So if you find yourself in a positive environment doing a job that you may not be a fan of, that's an opportunity for you to say, hey, I really love my team, and my my supervisor and leadership is great. The job isn't so fun, but the team I'm working with makes this job palatable, or this task palatable. Conversely, if you love your job and it's your favorite job and it's what you've always dreamed, but the environment is toxic, you have the power of choice to change that scenario, to change that script, as Joe's put it, to reframe your situation. You have that power. Do not give that power away. Do not let someone take that away. You retain the power of choice. Not saying it's going to be an easy choice or an easy decision, but you do retain that power. And you have to remember that no matter what the situation is, no matter how good, bad, or indifferent it is, how close or how far away from you are from your goals or the destinations or the journeys or the paths that you want to take, you and you yourself only have the power of choice. It just what it boils down to is whether you're going to give that power to someone, let them take that power, or whether you're going to retain that power. And that's really where Joe and I are focusing on this conversation, is because we've both experienced in our journeys, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your perspective, where we have advertently or inadvertently given up our power of choice.
right. Yeah.
And ultimately, we have found through many long discussions offline, because there's not enough time or storage space to carry out all these conversations, nor would you want to listen to them, I'm sure. But we have had these conversations offline where we have talked about the moments in our journeys where we've said, hey, I'm taking that power back. I'm making that decision, that tough
Yep.
decision, that easy decision that's going to enable us to continue down the path or self correct the path to be on the journey and the pace and the position that we want to be in. And you as our listeners have that same capacity and authority within yourselves to retain that power of choice or give it away. And we encourage you, if you've given that power of choice away, take it back. We're not
Right.
saying, go out and beat down doors or anything like that, but we're saying take it back for your own personal well-being, because that is a very huge thing to give up, and it is not a healthy thing to give up.
Right. I was just thinking back to previous episodes. That power of choice um, is our right.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we should not expect that if we give our power up, that we're going to gain what we want. If we give that power away, then we can only expect what others will allow us to achieve or to get.
Mm-hmm.
So, as Dave just said, we don't need for anyone to go in and knock down doors and say, "Hey, this is me. Look at me." But rather, in subtle ways, to just retain your power. Don't just give your power to anybody. Don't just allow people to dictate what you do. One of the things for my consulting business, one of my taglines or my tagline is take control of your life because it is your life. It's the decisions you're going to be left with it, whether they're yours or not. If you don't choose, use your power to say, hey, yes, I'm going to do this, or no, I'm not going to do that. It still comes down to the end of the day, if you made that choice or not, it's still you're going to have to live with it. So we, as Dave said, we encourage you to retain your power, keep your power. If you think that's difficult to do, and oftentimes it is, like Dave said, me and him both have allowed or relinquished our power and regretted it afterwards. So I know it's difficult, it's challenging, but start with those small ways you can retain your power until you get to that point where you are, really confident in retaining your power. I mean, just do some, you know, things that you can achieve, those things that that you can't control. Whether you get up and go to work every day, that's one of those things you can do. Um, just very simple things, simple task. Just pushing yourself beyond that. Maybe it is out of your comfort zone to do other things, but start with those things you can control. You can control, and then continue to build on those things to get you to a point where the more difficult things that you want to retain are easier to maintain. Because, like we said, it's not a good place when you give up your power and then you're left with whatever someone else chooses to allow you to do or become or whatever it is. And not saying that you become someone's slave, but you are going to be, you know, relying on them to make decisions for you. And in a lot of cases, it's not going to be in your benefit. So the way to overcome that is to retain your power. And like I said, it could be in your work setting, you're on a project team and they come to you and say, hey, do you have any input? Do you have any feedback? And you choose not to, and knowing you do, you've just given up your power to provide input or feedback. And so we've said this before, even if your information is not received or nobody really wants to hear it, you can walk away saying, I did my part. I gave mine. And if they choose not to, that's on them. You still retained your power by going forward, by moving forward, by saying, okay, I can check that off my box. I did my part. And if they choose not to or choose to go a different route, that's on them. But you provided your input, your feedback, whatever it is. And that's as simple as that. Like I say, it may be pushing yourself out of your comfort zone to do that. But I guarantee you'll feel better about yourself, not walking away and having regret saying, I knew I could say that I knew this was better. Whatever. You don't want to have those regrets that I allowed somebody else to dictate. And then you end up on a project or a team where you're like, I don't like this direction. And I think Dave said it earlier. You still have the right, or you still have the power to choose, hey, I'm going to stay with this. Or again, you still have the power to come back and say, you know what? Maybe we should try this. And you can still walk away with, okay, I did my part. I said what I needed to say. I did what I needed to do. I'm comfortable with that. And that's really what it's about. It's that you can walk away at the end of the day and say, I did what I was supposed to. Then you retain your power. It's when you don't say anything and then you're left with whatever's dictated to you, whatever's just handed to you, and you have to respond. So that's where we don't want you to be. Own your power of choice. It's all on you.
Very well said, Dr. Joe Hamlett. Any closing thoughts as we get ready to wrap things up for this session?
So, I mean, we've touched on a lot of different things, but I think if you really think about where you are, and I said it very early on in this episode about the victim and victor.
Mhm.
We all face situations every day, and some favorable and some not so favorable. But those ones that we face that are not so favorable, we still have a choice. You still have a choice of looking at it as, again, woe is me, take that victim mentality, or we can look at it and maybe it wasn't the outcome that you were seeking, but you can still look at it as, okay, I'm going to still gain something from this. You become the victor because you changed the narrative, you changed your script. You're not going to allow whatever that negative outcome was. It's not going to dictate where you go and how you proceed. So I think that's very important, that if you just look at every scenario, situation as best as you can, and try to form something positive from it. And I think you'll always own your power of choice because you can choose whether you see it as negative or positive.
Mhm.
So I think I'll end with that.
Thank you, Dr. Joe Hamlett. Um, uh, just a closing thought from myself. If you're struggling with the power of choice, and taking that power back, you know, talk to your trusted support network, your family, your close friends, mentors, whoever those few special people are in your life that you can go to. Reach out to them and talk with them, and come up with a good plan to bring that power back into your favor, into your house, inside you,
Yep.
and instead of letting it linger out there and for someone else to play with, like a cat and a cat toy. So there's an interesting visual for you to depart with. So with that being said, we'd like to thank you, our viewers and listeners, for joining us for another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. And until next time, keep on being your not so ordinary you.